Hello and welcome to Laura Banks Fine Artist YouTube channel. Today I am back in Doylestown, Pennsylvania to visit Fonthill Castle. Only this time I'm here for a very special behind the scenes tour where I get to see what only 1% of the visitors get to explore. If you're interested, I covered the daily Fonthill Castle tour, or what I refer to as the regular tour, in another blog post and YouTube video, and I will link them in the comments below. In that video, you get to see what people will typically see when they go on one of these tours. But in this video, you're going to see something very different. If you're new to my channel, please check out my website at laurabanksfineart.com. Also, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. It really helps my small channel grow. Here's just a quick intro into Fonthill Castle. If you're not familiar with Fonthill Castle, it was a concrete building that has become a historic house and museum. In its day, it served as the home of Henry Chapman Mercer, who can be described as an anthropologist, archaeologist, ceramist, scholar, and antiquarian. Fonthill Castle served as both a home and a showplace for Henry Mercer's famous Moravian tiles and boasts an eclectic mix of medieval, Gothic, and Byzantine architecture. Construction of Fonthill Castle started in 1908 and took 4 years to complete in 1912. Fonthill Castle is comprised of 44 rooms, 200 plus windows, 10 bathrooms, and 18 fireplaces. So the daily or regular tour is about a 60-minute guided tour featuring many of the castle's main rooms. As of this video, the cost of this tour will cost you about $20 per adult, $17 for seniors age 65 or above, $15 for students, $10 for youth, and children under 5 are free. Now, on the other hand, this special behind-the-scenes tour is a 90-minute tour that offers less frequently explored rooms that you won't see on the regular tour. As of this video, this tour costs $50 for adults, $25 for youth, which they say is 14 to 17, and these tours are not offered every day, so it's important that you check out the dates and times to make sure they're offered if you want to check it out. Now, the daily or regular tour sees the middle part of the castle, which is approximately 30% of the rooms. On the other hand, the behind-the-scenes tour sees over 50% of the castle, about 24 rooms. During the behind-the-scenes tour, you're basically exploring all the way from the basement up to the attic, and you get to explore some of the central parts of the castle as well, which started as an 1820 farmhouse and became part of the staff quarters. So similar to the daily tour, the behind-the-scenes tour starts by first checking in at the carriage house or the welcome center, as it's called. Here you can use the bathroom, see some brochures, pick up souvenirs, and just get ready for the tour. When it's time, your tour guide will find you, and you will head outside. Your first stop in the tour, just like the daily tour, is right out in front of the castle. And here you get an introduction into Henry Mercer and the castle's history. All tours enter the castle by the same door and starts in this very first room. This first room is dimly lit with window light and capped with low vaulted ceilings that were purposely painted black. It is kind of reminiscent of a monastery interior with that Gothic feel. In this room, my attention is always drawn to this one wall. It has these very large 3D tiles on them, and they have a very smoky finish. They kind of remind me of a Persian rug. So you have to be kind of quick in this room and look around because the tour did not linger long here. The next room that we entered was the saloon, which is the largest space in the house with 15-foot-high ceilings. In Henry's time, this was the main entertainment space of the castle and a way for Henry to show off some of his tiles. In this room, there is a very large cardboard cutout of Henry Mercer, and it's positioned in front of a very intricately tiled fireplace. This second room is also part of the daily tour as well. Again, we didn't linger too long in this room because then we were headed down a small passage to the morning room, and the morning room was the first room that we saw that was not on the daily tour. This is where we get our first taste of more private rooms within the castle. Mercer supposedly named this room after the beautiful sunlight that would come in each morning. He would use this room as a private nook. It had a bathroom conveniently located close by, and there was a loft above where he could take a nap. A little quirk of this room, and there were many little quirky details throughout this castle. By the windows, if you look up, there is an alligator dangling from the ceiling. I don't know why it's there, but I bet Henry named it. That's just my guess. The centerpiece of this room is definitely the fireplace. Here you see these beautifully designed tiles that were attributed to a tapestry that Henry saw when he was traveling in Florence, Italy with his Aunt Elizabeth. On part of the fireplace, you can see Latin words that translate to mean fortunes ablaze. You actually can see Latin all over the castle because Henry could read and write in Latin. Now, going back to Henry's Aunt Elizabeth, he owes a lot to her. She was married to an Italian diplomat, which meant that she was very wealthy. She did not have children of her own and maybe doted on Henry instead. Now, Henry also had a sister and a brother. I didn't learn too much about them on this tour. It would be interesting to find out if they were also doted on by Aunt Elizabeth. Aunt Elizabeth paid for much of Henry's higher education, including Harvard University and Pennsylvania University. She also paid for many of his travels and helped him start his successful tile works. When Aunt Elizabeth died in 1905, she left Henry Mercer approximately $200,000, and he started construction on Fonthill Castle in 1908. Now, I tried to look up how much $200,000 would be in 2025 money. It looks like it's probably around $7 or $8 million. So, nice chunk of change there. I was especially excited to see the morning room on this tour because when I've taken previous tours at Fonthill Castle, I will always ask the tour guide what is their favorite room, and every time they said it was the morning room. It was a little overcast on the day that I went to visit, so that might have dampened the effect of the light coming in somewhat. It was definitely a nice room. The fireplace was probably my favorite in the whole castle. However, I just wasn't as blown away as I expected to be, and I think it might have been because my expectations were so high. I definitely have my favorite room, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. The next room that we entered was Henry Mercer's original bedroom on the east side of the castle. This bedroom is technically on the daily tour, but you're not allowed to go inside the bedroom on the daily tour. On this tour, however, we got to go inside the bedroom, look around in the bathroom. So that was a nice change. So this is where Henry would stay before health issues and light sensitivity forced him to move to the other side of the castle, which is much darker. I really liked this room because it was really filled with light. It seemed like a very pleasant place to have a bedroom. Now, Henry Mercer was one of the first people in Doylestown to install private plumbing. In this room, you can walk into the attached bathroom. And here you can see the bathtub, and above the bathtub, you can see the Irish phrase, top of the morning. This was just a little bit of Henry's quirky humor because his bathroom was right above the morning room that we were just in. Another interesting thing about this bathroom is that the sink is not inside the bathroom, it's actually on the outside in the bedroom itself. On our way to our next stop, we passed through Henry's dressing room. Here you can see a custom-made wardrobe and dresser, and compared to the rest of Fonthill Castle, this room is very plain. The reason may be because it was just for clothing storage and dressing, and guests probably were not in this room very often. The next stop out of the bedroom was the Columbus room. This is also seen on the daily tour. This is actually the highest point that the daily tour ever goes. But today we're going to go a lot higher. We're going to go up to the attic. I really like the Columbus room. It's not my all-time favorite, but it's one of my favorites. And that's because of all the beautiful, colorful tiles, especially on the ceiling. It was in this room that our tour guide started to talk a little bit about how they constructed the castle. The castle walls were apparently constructed by first making a wooden frame, then filling it with rebar and concrete. Once the concrete had set, then the wooden frames would be removed. For the ceilings, he would use scaffolding and mounds of compacted sand and soil to shape the vaulted ceiling, and the tiles would be placed face down from above, and the concrete would be poured over them so that they would be stuck in the concrete. As you begin to tour the castle, it's obvious that Henry was not trained in architecture and no level was used during the construction process. It really actually astonishes me how well the building has held up. Another interesting feature in this room is a little staircase known as Rollo's Staircase. This was named after Henry Mercer's favorite Chesapeake retriever. On the steps, you see these paw prints pressed into the concrete that are supposedly Rollo's. However, there's some controversy about whether that's true or not. On previous tours I've taken, I've always been fascinated about where does that staircase lead. And on this tour, we got to find out, but not quite yet. Then, leaving the Columbus room, you head into a tiny side room. This smaller room is not on the daily tour, and it had changed names several times. At one point, it was known as the Bow Room or the Mexican Room. It was sometimes called the Mexican Room because of the 16th century map of Mexico City that you can see in tiles on the ceiling. And in this small room, there are some interesting tiles on the floor, as well as some prints on the wall. And then after spending a few minutes in this room, we then passed out of this room onto the balcony. In order to get to the balcony from this room, we then had to pass through this very narrow passageway, which had these beautiful shiny tiles on the sides. It was so narrow that you really had to turn slightly sideways to get through it. That's one thing about this castle, is that there are some very narrow passageways and winding staircases that would be hard to navigate if you had some mobility issues. After experiencing both tours and comparing the daily tour with the behind-the-scenes tour, I really did notice that there are more winding passages on the behind-the-scenes tour, and that's probably why they chose certain rooms for the daily tour versus the behind-the-scenes tour, because most people would do better on the daily tour than the behind-the-scenes tour, especially if you had issues with mobility. So then we headed out onto the balcony. This is also seen on the daily tour. You just get here by a different door. From the balcony, you can look up at the rooftops. There are 500-gallon cisterns located up there that would feed water to the rest of the castle. From here, you can also see the spring house that acted like an underground refrigerator. And a little ways off, there's this concrete pond that you can see water kind of flowing to. After exploring the balcony, we then headed back through the Mexican room back to the Columbus room, to the foot of Rollo's Staircase. Next, we headed up a very narrow, winding staircase. It was a very tight squeeze, and I had to hold onto the wall to prevent myself from losing my balance. At the top of these stairs, you come to the wind room, which is essentially an attic. This room was basically used for storage, so not many people came up here. Henry called it the wind room because of the heavy wind sounds that could be heard during a storm. Some people describe it as sounding like a tornado coming through. And again, this part is not seen on the daily tour. It's so high up in the tower part of the castle that it's right below the giant cisterns that are located on the roof. Because a lot of people didn't come up here, there weren't a ton of tiles decorating the room. There were some around the windows and around a tiny fireplace, but it wasn't as grand as what you see downstairs. I was personally drawn to these wall decorations that represented the 4 winds. I thought they were a little different than Henry's usual style, and you didn't see too many kind of portrait-like faces in his tiles. After exploring the wind room, then we headed back downstairs, but we exited through a different doorway. We found ourselves in this central hallway or hub of the castle rooms. This is an area that you do see on the daily tour. And in this area, you see a cardboard cutout of Laura Swain, who was Henry's housekeeper. Laura was about 25 years younger than Henry and eventually married his tile and property manager, Frank Swain. The couple was very loyal and close to Henry, and the castle went to the couple upon Henry's death in 1930. The understanding was that upon the couple's death, the house would be passed to the Bucks County Historical Society, of which Henry was a founding member. So Henry died in 1930 and Frank died in 1954. And after that, Laura was in the castle for about 20 years on her own. She would occasionally give tours through the castle, and she finally moved out in 1974 at the age of 86 and passed away in 1975. It definitely made me sad to think about Laura here on her own after the men in her life had passed away. Another prominent feature in this area is a wall of cubby holes, and this is where Laura would keep all the keys to the house. Although there were 44 rooms to the house, some of the rooms had multiple ways to get in, so there were multiple keys for different rooms of the house. I'm sure it was fun trying to keep track of all those keys. Then we headed into the Aviary, which was another area where a few rooms would converge. From here you can see examples of Henry's earlier tiles as well as some of his later tiles that were installed just months before his death. This is another area that is seen on the daily tour, but from this area, if you look up, you can see the breakfast room, and that room is not seen on the daily tour, but was the next stop on the behind the scenes tour. So when Henry built Fonthill Castle, he built it around this original 1820s farmhouse. The breakfast room was part of that original farmhouse, and the floorboards were the same that dated back all the way to the 1820s. This was the room that really separated the private and public spaces of Henry Mercer and his staff. When Henry Mercer was still alive, there was a large dining room table in the center of this room, and this is where Henry and his staff would eat breakfast. Apparently, most of the time, breakfast was scrambled eggs, and it would get up to the breakfast room by a dumbwaiter that connected to the kitchen below, and the dumbwaiter is located in the Aviary. Similar to other rooms in the castle, the breakfast room was filled with a lot of beautiful Eastern light. Henry modified this room by increasing the ceiling height of the original building by about 10 feet. He also added a Russian fireplace, which was decorated in these beautiful three-dimensional tiles. Another interesting feature of this room was this tall wall of mirrors that helped to reflect the light as well as expand the sense of space. After leaving the breakfast room, we passed by Henry's smoking room on the right. This was another room not seen on the daily tour, and we couldn't go into this room, but we could peek inside as we passed by. What I really liked about this space was Henry used the tiles in this room almost like wallpaper. The next two rooms were part of the staff quarters. There was the marine room and then Frank's bedroom off to the side. And originally they weren't connected, but they drilled through the wall and installed a door so that Frank had a bedroom as well as an office. So not surprisingly, Henry's tiles found their way even into the staff quarters of the castle. So even though there weren't as many tiles as some of the other bedrooms, they were still present. And in the marine room, there are some tiles around the archway of the door that Henry had collected from the Netherlands. And you can see these little black numbers on them, which was Henry Mercer's way of cataloging those tiles. So one really interesting detail of this area of the castle is something you see as you head out of these rooms. There is this plaque on the wall that Henry made out of tiles, and the plaque recognizes all the men and Lucy the horse who helped to construct the castle. Next, we headed into the block room, and the block room is located in the rightmost section of the castle. You can even see the welcome center from here. And at one point, this room was Laura Swain's room. However, today, this room and the stair room, which is located next to it, are used as the conservator's offices. Both of these rooms, the block room and the stair room, are also not seen on the daily tour. So they are the true behind the scenes. This is where people are currently working and helping to preserve this museum. So they call this the behind the scenes tour from tower to crypt. So our next stop was actually the underbelly of the castle all the way to the crypt. So no worries if you're a little squeamish, there are no bodies hidden down here. because when Henry referred to this space as the crypt, he was using the more ancient definition of crypt, meaning subterranean basement space. So to get to the crypt, we had to meander back through the castle, down to the big saloon, and then there was a door off to the side, and we entered another winding staircase downstairs, again another tight fit. So the crypt was one of the first spaces constructed in the castle, and this is where Henry did a lot of experimentation with his techniques. You can see that some of the columns are not as tidy as his future columns that you see upstairs, and the tiles are actually very different than some of the other tiles that you see upstairs, some of his later work. One thing that really surprised me about this space, even though it still felt like a basement, it was actually pretty full of light because there were a lot of windows. You don't get that same creepy atmosphere that you might get in what you would imagine a crypt to look like. In one corner of the room, you can see this scale model that Henry made for a competition. The competition was to make a memorial for the Battle of Fredericksburg during the Civil War. He did not win, but it's actually a pretty interesting model to look at. Some other things that you can see down here, there's a large fireplace in the corner. There's also a large door that is the entry into the farmhouse basement. We did not get to go through that door, so I don't know what that looks like. Also on the steps, you see dog prints similar to Rollo's staircase in the Columbus room. There is a wine cellar that still has wine in it. And again, just more of Mercer's tiles, but of a different design. This was definitely another one of those rooms that you do not see on the daily tour. So then we went back upstairs and we were supposed to go in one more room. And this is actually my absolutely favorite room of the entire castle, and that's the conservatory. So by this time in the tour, the castle had gotten pretty crowded, so there were a lot of other tours going on at the same time. Most of them were daily tours. Unfortunately, when we were ready to go into the conservatory, there was already a group in there. So our tour guide took us outside, and I was hoping that she was going to wait until they were done and then bring us in, but she actually cut the tour early. So I was definitely a little disappointed because I didn't get to see my favorite room of the castle. So luckily, you can also see this room on the daily or the regular tour. I think why I love this room so much is it's so bright and filled with light. There are these beautiful large ferns hanging in the window, and they just bring this beautiful sense of life into the castle. The Spanish-inspired tiles are beautiful, and it's just a very peaceful, tranquil place. If I would have to pick what my favorite room is, even after seeing the behind-the-scenes tour and the morning room, I'd have to say that the conservatory remains my favorite room in this castle. So kind of my final thoughts on this tour. It was really fun going on the behind-the-scenes tour. You felt like you got a chance to see something really special. So one of my criticisms was that, at least on our tour, it really started to get busy in the castle, and unfortunately it prevented us from seeing my favorite room, so I was bummed about that. But overall, it was really interesting. Another thing to note, if you're planning to take this tour, the spaces you have to navigate are much tighter and steeper than on the daily tour. So if you have mobility deficits, you might want to call ahead and find out whether this is a good tour for you or not. There was a lady on the tour who was in her 90s, but she was in pretty good shape. So again, it all depends on where you are. Hopefully, if you're in the area, you get a chance to take this tour. It's a little bit pricier than the other one, but again, you get to see some things that normally don't get seen. So I definitely recommend it. And thank you so much for coming along with me on this tour, and have a wonderful day.